When Keanu Reeves walked into a glittering charity auction wearing a simple black suit, people laughed, assuming he didn't belong. But by the end of the night, the laughter would vanish, and every camera in the room would turn toward him. What he did next would silence the wealthy and redefine what it means to give. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The night sky above Los Angeles shimmered with promise as a line of luxury cars stretched along the curb outside the Grand Marigold Hotel. Cameras flashed in waves, catching diamonds, designer gowns, and polished smiles. A string quartet played by the entrance, their music soft but deliberate, perfectly curated to sound expensive. Guests stepped out of limousines and into a sea of lights, each arrival greeted by murmurs of recognition and envy. Inside, the ballroom glowed in gold and ivory, chandeliers hanging like captured constellations. Every table was marked with a name known to someone: actors, donors, politicians, heirs. This was more than a charity auction. It was a stage where status was currency and generosity was measured in applause. Then came the moment no one expected. Amid the red carpet glamour, a single black sedan pulled up quietly, almost modestly. The valet stepped forward, unsure of what to do at first. The car door opened, and out stepped Keanu Reeves. No entourage, no stylist, no assistant holding his coat. Just him, dressed in a plain black suit that looked sharp but simple. His hair brushed back, his demeanor calm. Cameras hesitated, as if uncertain whether to flash. For a brief moment, the crowd stilled. He gave a polite nod to the photographers and walked through the entrance, his shoes clicking softly on marble. The reporters nearby exchanged glances, unsure if this understated arrival was a deliberate statement or a mistake. "Is he really coming alone?" one whispered. Another chuckled under his breath. Guess he didn't get the memo about dress codes. A few forced laughs followed, muffled but sharp enough to sting the air. Inside, the scene was a masterpiece of opulence. Crystal glasses lined the tables beside towering centerpieces of white orchids. The air carried the faint scent of champagne and money. Conversations overlapped like a hum of vanity, discussing yachts, film deals, vacation homes. Keanu took it all in quietly, offering small nods as guests noticed him. A woman in a sequined gown turned to her friend. "That's Keanu Reeves, right? I thought he was more of a recluse." Her friend smirked. "Maybe he's here for the attention. Even humble people need a spotlight sometimes." Keanu smiled politely when they glanced his way. Though he had heard every word, he wasn't offended. He had grown used to misjudgments. In places like this, silence was often mistaken for weakness, and simplicity for lack of means. But he had not come tonight to impress anyone. He had come because the cause mattered, because behind the glitter stood a children's hospital struggling to survive. The announcer's voice echoed across the ballroom, calling guests to their tables as the auction prepared to begin. Applause followed each introduction of sponsors, and the sound of cutlery against porcelain filled the brief pauses. Keanu walked toward his table, unnoticed by most, and took a seat near the back where the lighting dimmed. From there, he could see everything: the glamour, the pride, and the quiet emptiness that often hid beneath it. As Keanu settled into his chair, he noticed how every detail of the evening seemed choreographed to perfection. The chandelier light shimmered off the wine glasses like liquid stars. The waiters, dressed in crisp white jackets, moved in silent synchronization, placing plates with delicate precision. Yet, beneath all the elegance, Keanu could feel a tension, a certain hunger that had nothing to do with food. This was a gathering not of givers but of competitors, each one vying to be seen as more generous, more powerful, more important than the next. At his table sat people whose faces he vaguely recognized from magazines and screens. An investment tycoon boasted about a new mansion in Malibu. A socialite with diamond earrings shaped like tears leaned forward, feigning interest while scanning the room for someone more important to speak to. Keanu simply listened. His quietness seemed to unnerve them. In a world where noise defined relevance, silence could be disarming. Across the room, Laughter erupted. A famous producer had just made a joke at the expense of another guest's outfit, and the crowd rewarded him with clinking glasses and smug smiles. Keanu glanced their way, then back to his table, where a small card listed the night's auction items: paintings, jewelry, trips to private islands. Each line came with starting bids that could fund a year's worth of medical treatments for children in need. Yet, to these guests, the items were tokens proof of influence, not compassion. A volunteer passed by, her silver name tag catching the light. She couldn't have been older than 65, her posture slightly bent, her face kind, but tired. She smiled when she noticed Keanu. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Reeves," she said softly. "It means a lot to see someone who genuinely cares about the cause." He nodded. "It's the least I can do." Her eyes softened. "You'd be surprised how many people say that, but don't mean it." She gave a polite bow and moved on, balancing a tray of programs. Moments later, a group of reporters entered, their lenses ready. They circled the tables like sharks scenting blood, snapping photos of the most elaborately dressed guests. One paused at Keanu's table but hesitated before taking a picture. He wasn't posing, smiling, or offering a soundbite. He was just there unbothered, quiet, almost out of place. The photographer moved on, chasing brighter jewels and louder personalities. A faint murmur started near the front, someone pointing out that Keanu had arrived without security, without fanfare, without anything that screamed celebrity. The whispers spread quickly, carried by curiosity and quiet disdain. "He probably came for the publicity," one woman muttered. "If that's his idea of making an impression, it's working for all the wrong reasons." Another laughed softly. "Maybe he forgot his tux." Keanu looked toward the stage where the auctioneer tested the microphone. He exhaled slowly. He had attended many events like this, but tonight felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, as if the cause had been buried under vanity. He knew, before the night was over, that would change. The lights dimmed slightly as the evening's host, a well-known television personality, took the stage with a microphone in hand. Her voice carried the charm of practiced confidence. "Tonight, we gather not only to celebrate generosity, but to make a difference," she said. The crowd responded with polite applause, though many barely looked up from their conversations. Waiters poured more wine, laughter continued, and the sound of phones clicking against champagne glasses filled the air. Keanu's gaze drifted across the ballroom. Beneath the glow of chandeliers, he noticed the small contradictions: the man who bid loudly on a diamond necklace while scrolling through his messages, the woman who smiled for every camera but frowned between flashes. This was the charity world at its most polished and most hollow. He didn't resent it, he simply saw through it. The host continued her speech, naming the donors who had given the largest checks. Each name earned applause, and each recipient stood, smiling graciously. The cameras zoomed in for perfect shots. The applause grew louder, but it didn't sound like gratitude. It sounded like competition. At the back of the room, Keanu sipped water and remained unseen. He preferred it that way. A few people at his table exchanged small talk, one of them asking if he planned to bid on anything. "We're saving the best for last," a man said, his voice smug. "A painting by some unknown kid. They're expecting it to fetch at least $20,000. Probably won't." Keanu gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. He remembered why he was there, the children's hospital that was struggling to fund a new wing for critical care. For him, that was what mattered, not the spectacle unfolding around him. A sudden burst of laughter erupted near the stage as one guest joked about turning donations into tax breaks. The host laughed along, her microphone amplifying the humor for the whole room. Keanu watched as even that moment, meant to inspire charity, became entertainment. Still, he stayed calm, his hands resting lightly on the tablecloth. As the opening speeches ended and the first auction items were introduced, the room's energy shifted. The bidding began fast and loud, each call a duel of pride. Yet, amid the noise, Keanu's quiet presence drew curious glances. To some, he seemed out of place. To others, he was invisible. But deep down, something in the air was changing, a tension forming beneath the glamour, a truth waiting to break through. No one knew that before the night ended, this quiet man in a plain black suit would leave everyone questioning what true wealth really means. The lobby of the Grand Marigold Hotel gleamed with polished marble and gold accents, a place where every reflection seemed rehearsed. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses echoed from the nearby ballroom entrance. At the check-in desk stood a young receptionist named Amanda, her posture straight but her hands fidgeting as the next guest approached. She had been told to expect important names tonight: senators, billionaires, film producers. But when Keanu Reeves stepped forward, her confidence flickered. He wore the same quiet composure he carried into every room, the kind that made people either comfortable or confused. His black suit was tailored but unpretentious, his shoes polished but worn from real use. Amanda glanced up from her tablet, her eyes narrowing slightly as if something didn't match. "Good evening, sir. Name, please?" "Keanu Reeves," he said, his tone calm and friendly. Her hand froze midway through typing. She blinked twice, wondering if she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, did you say Reeves?" "As in, yes," he replied with a faint smile. "That's me." Amanda quickly scrolled through the digital guest list. His name was there, of course, highlighted in gold as one of the event's confirmed attendees. Still, she hesitated, whispering the name under her breath. Behind her, two elegantly dressed women exchanged glances. One of them whispered loud enough for others to hear, "Is that really him? He looks so plain." The other chuckled. "Maybe he came to play the humble card. You know, celebrities do that sometimes for publicity." Amanda's cheeks flushed with secondhand embarrassment. She stammered, "Oh, welcome, Mr. Reeves. We're so honored to have you with us tonight." Keanu nodded gently. "Thank you." As he signed his name on the registration tablet, a man standing nearby, a property developer named Victor Lane, overheard the exchange. He turned with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Keanu Reeves, huh? Didn't expect you to be so low-key. Don't you usually come with an assistant or something?" Keanu looked up, his expression unreadable but kind. "Not tonight," Victor shrugged, his tone dripping with condescension. "Bold move. Most people here don't go anywhere without a PR team. Guess that's one way to stand out." Keanu smiled faintly. Standing out isn't the goal. Amanda pretended to organize her papers to avoid eye contact. She could feel the tension simmering, the unspoken question floating in the air about whether this soft-spoken man belonged in a place so obsessed with spectacle. Victor looked him up and down once more, his smirk growing. "I read somewhere you still drive that old Norton motorcycle yourself. Must be nice not worrying about impressing anyone." "It's peaceful," Keanu said simply. "And it still runs." Victor laughed as if it were a joke. Sure. Well, good luck blending in tonight." He turned away, muttering to the women nearby. Hope he remembered his checkbook. Keanu finished signing, thanked Amanda with a calm nod, and moved toward the ballroom doors. Behind him, the whispers followed like perfume light, lingering and full of judgment. Keanu walked past the double doors leading toward the ballroom entrance, but before he reached it, a small line had formed at the coat check. He waited patiently, hands loosely in his pockets, as the guests ahead of him handed over designer jackets trimmed with fur and custom embroidery. A woman in front of him glanced over her shoulder, her perfume heavy, her voice sharp. "You must be the +1 for someone, right?" Keanu smiled. "No, just attending." Her eyes widened, though not from recognition. "Really? Alone?" She laughed softly, turning to the man beside her. "That's brave. Or odd. I can't decide." The man, clearly amused, joined in. "Maybe he's here to network. These charity things are crawling with people trying to make an impression." Keanu's eyes flickered with quiet amusement. He didn't respond. He handed over his black coat when it was his turn. The attendant hesitated for a moment before realizing who he was. His eyes widened, his mouth opening slightly, but Keanu just smiled and thanked him for the ticket. As he moved forward again, Amanda watched from behind her desk, still thinking about what had just happened. Something about his calm demeanor unsettled her. Most famous people came in with flashes and fanfare. They wanted to be seen, recognized, adored. This man didn't need any of it. She found herself wondering why. Meanwhile, Victor Lane was already inside the ballroom, holding court near the front tables. His laughter rang out loud enough to reach the hall. He had started telling a story to his circle, one that conveniently included Keanu. "So, picture this," Victor said, his tone dripping with mock sympathy. Keanu Reeves walks in. No tux, no entourage, no driver, just strolls up like he's checking into a motel. The group around him burst into laughter. "Did he really?" someone asked. Victor nodded. "You'd think a man who's been in Hollywood for decades would know how this works. I mean, what's the point of being rich if you don't look the part?" The conversation drew nearby ears. The tone of the night had started to shift, an undercurrent of amusement threaded through the crowd. They hadn't even reached the main event, and already whispers about Keanu's simplicity had begun to spread. Inside, Keanu found his table assignment, a small placard near the back with his name printed neatly in gold lettering. He took a seat quietly and scanned the room, observing rather than judging. The laughter, the perfume, the artificial sparkle, it all blended into a blur of noise and light. He had been in this position before, in rooms full of people who mistook stillness for weakness. It didn't bother him anymore. What mattered wasn't how they saw him tonight, but how they would remember what he stood for after the night was over. At the entrance, Amanda glanced one last time toward the ballroom and whispered under her breath, "I hope they see what I just saw." As Keanu settled into his seat, the chatter inside the ballroom grew louder. The evening was just beginning, and the atmosphere already pulsed with competition masked as charity. Waiters moved gracefully between tables, carrying trays of champagne that glowed under the chandelier light. The sound of laughter filled every corner, but not the kind that came from joy. It was the laughter of people who wanted to be overheard. Keanu unfolded the event brochure on his table and studied the list of auction items. He traced the line mentioning the children's hospital expansion, noting the estimated costs and goals. It struck him how small the cause looked next to the grandeur of the event itself. He looked around. Some guests were already bragging about their bids before the auction had even begun. At a nearby table, Victor Lane noticed Keanu sitting alone and smirked. "Still looks lost," he muttered. His companion laughed. Maybe he wandered in from the wrong event. Their mockery was casual, careless, but it spread easily. Others turned to look, judging his unassuming posture, the lack of designer flair. A photographer passed by, camera poised. When the lens found Keanu, it hesitated. He wasn't performing, wasn't posing. He simply sat quietly, eyes thoughtful, shoulders relaxed. The photographer almost moved on, but then something about the calm in his expression made him take the shot anyway. It wasn't glamour that drew him in, it was sincerity, something rare in that room. Meanwhile, Amanda at the check-in desk couldn't shake her unease. She had seen plenty of celebrities arrive in her short career, each one grander than the last, but none like him. His patience had caught her off guard. Even when others laughed, even when she stumbled on his name, he'd only smiled. She turned toward the ballroom entrance just in time to see Victor's group whispering about him. Her stomach tightened. She couldn't explain why, but she felt protective of the man they were ridiculing. Inside, Keanu listened as the host took the stage to introduce the evening's sponsors. Applause thundered for names attached to billion-dollar companies. He clapped politely but remained quiet. Beneath the surface of all the ceremony, he could feel a different current, one that had nothing to do with fame or fortune. Tonight, people would reveal who they truly were, not through the money they spent, but through the respect they showed. He leaned back slightly in his chair, taking one last look at the laughing crowd. The night had only begun, but already he sensed that something deeper was waiting to unfold. Something that would test not just their generosity, but their grace. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as the auctioneer took the stage, his voice warm and commanding. The golden glow from the chandeliers danced across the polished glass tables, reflecting in the flutes of champagne that waiters refilled with practiced grace. A low murmur rippled through the room as the guests settled into their seats, adjusting jewelry, straightening cuffs, and exchanging polite smiles that rarely reached their eyes. Keanu sat near the back, his chair angled just enough to give him a clear view of the stage. He had intentionally chosen a seat away from the spotlight, blending into the quiet half-shadows where few would think to look. Around him, the sound of laughter rose and fell in rhythmic waves, every note laced with self-importance. The auctioneer began with a confident smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the annual Grand Marigold Charity Gala, where generosity shines as brightly as the stars before us tonight." Applause filled the room. Some clapped because they meant it, others because it was expected. The first item rolled onto the stage, a diamond necklace framed by velvet and spotlights. "Starting bid at $50,000, the auctioneer announced. Immediately, hands went up. A woman with crimson lipstick raised her paddle and smiled triumphantly as others followed. The bidding rose fast, each shout of a higher number echoing like gunfire in a contest of pride. By the time the hammer fell, the necklace sold for 3 times its value. The buyer received a standing ovation, not for the cause, but for the display. Keanu watched quietly, a faint smile touching his lips. He wasn't judging, only observing the theater of it all, the way people seemed to crave acknowledgement more than meaning. The second item, a week-long stay at a private resort in Fiji, went even higher. Then came a collection of rare wines. Each sale brought more clinking glasses, more empty praise. At his table sat an older woman with silver hair and gentle eyes. Her volunteer badge read Marjorie. She had been serving the hospital for over 2 decades, long before the galas became fashionable. She smiled at Keanu as she noticed his quiet amusement. "Quite the show, isn't it?" she said softly. He nodded. "It's something," Marjorie chuckled. "I've been watching these auctions for years. The numbers get bigger, but the hearts don't always follow." Her words carried weight, and Keanu leaned slightly forward, listening. "You've been with the hospital long?" "Since my granddaughter was treated there," she said, her eyes softening. "She didn't make it, but the care she received it changed me. I promised I'd help them help others, no matter what it took." She paused, watching the crowd cheer for another 6-figure bid. "Some people give money, others give heart. The hospital needs both, but one keeps the lights on, and the other keeps the hope alive." Keanu's expression deepened. Her words lingered like a quiet truth beneath the noise of applause. The next auction item rolled onto the stage, a private dinner with a world-renowned chef. The auctioneer's voice carried excitement as he waved toward the gleaming table set up beside him. "Who'll start the bidding at $60,000, he called. Instantly, a hand shot up near the front. A man in a white tuxedo smirked as he raised his paddle, clearly pleased with himself. Another guest, an actress whose diamonds sparkled like a chandelier, jumped in with a higher bid. The crowd came alive again, laughing, whispering, cheering. Keanu watched in silence, fascinated not by the money being exchanged, but by the reactions. Every increase in bid seemed to ignite a spark of ego. The auctioneer's rhythm quickened, his voice swelling with theatrical tension, until the final number echoed through the hall, $250,000. The crowd erupted, half in admiration, half in envy. Marjorie smiled faintly, shaking her head. "They'll spend that much on a dinner they'll forget by next week. But ask for volunteers to visit the kids' ward, and you'll hear crickets." Keanu glanced toward her. "Do you think they understand what this is really about?" She sighed. "I think they want to believe they do, but for many of them, it's not about helping, it's about being seen helping. Still, even that's something. The hospital needs the funds." Across the room, Victor Lane was holding court again, bragging loudly to a small circle. "This is how you make a difference. Folks, money talks. The rest is noise," he declared, raising his champagne glass. His friends applauded him like disciples. Keanu looked at him briefly, then returned his attention to the stage. A new item was unveiled, a limited edition watch made from reclaimed space materials. The auctioneer made a dramatic gesture, as though revealing treasure, starting at $100,000. The bids climbed rapidly once more. The room pulsed with energy, but it wasn't generosity. It was performance. Every bid was an announcement. Look at me, I can give more. Marjorie leaned closer. I once saw a janitor donate $50 to this hospital. 50. It was all he had for the month, but he said he couldn't sleep knowing some child might not get treatment. I told that story last year. What happened? Keanu asked. She smiled wistfully. Someone offered $50,000 just to have the story printed in the event brochure. They wanted their name attached to it. Keanu exhaled slowly, his gaze distant. He wasn't angry, just quietly saddened. He knew fame came with illusions, but nights like this revealed something deeper about human nature. People were so desperate to look good that they forgot how to be good. The auctioneer moved briskly on to the next item, his voice rising again. Keanu took a sip of water, his calm demeanor unshaken. But beneath that calm, a thought began to take root, something about what real giving should look like. The next few items followed in quick succession: artwork, jewelry, and luxury vacations, each fetching prices that made the audience gasp with delight. The rhythm of the evening became predictable. The rich applauded the rich. Each win was followed by another toast, another photo, another round of self-congratulation. Keanu watched it all unfold like a scene in a film he'd seen too many times before. Then, as the applause softened between rounds, Marjorie leaned in again, lowering her voice. You know what keeps this hospital alive, Mr. Reeves? It's not nights like this. It's the quiet donations no one talks about. A teacher who sends in $10 a month. A retired nurse who bakes cookies for the staff. The people who give without needing anyone to know. Keanu looked at her thoughtfully. And yet, they're not the ones in this room tonight. Marjorie's eyes softened. No, but sometimes, one person can remind them why they're here in the first place. Before he could reply, the auctioneer announced a brief intermission. Guests rose from their seats, laughing, gossiping, and heading toward the bar. The air filled with chatter about who had bid the most and who had been outbid by whom. Victor Lane strutted past Keanu's table, boasting loudly. You've got to spend big to make headlines, he said to his entourage. That's how you stay relevant in this city. Marjorie glanced at him, then at Keanu. He's donated every year, she said quietly, but he always makes sure everyone knows it. Keanu smiled, faintly. Maybe tonight isn't about the ones who make noise. Maybe it's about the ones who don't. As the guests milled around, a waiter approached with fresh glasses of sparkling water. Keanu thanked him and remained seated, preferring the calm of the quiet moment. He watched as a small group of medical staff, nurses, and administrators stood near the edge of the room, looking slightly out of place amid the gowns and tuxedos. Their smiles were genuine but humble. They weren't here for attention. They were here because every dollar raised meant a new bed, a new piece of equipment, a new chance for a child's life. When the auctioneer's voice called everyone back to their seats, Keanu's gaze lingered on those staff members. Something about their quiet presence mirrored what Marjorie had said. They gave heart, not just money. He turned back to her and said softly, You were right. Some people give to be seen. Others give so others can live. Marjorie smiled. And which one are you, Mr. Reeves? He looked toward the stage, where the final items of the night waited behind a velvet curtain. I guess we'll find out. As the intermission ended, guests returned to their tables with renewed energy. Laughter rolled through the ballroom like soft thunder. The air smelled of perfume, champagne, and quiet arrogance. Victor Lane, who had already made himself the unofficial master of ceremonies, stood near the front, waving his drink as he entertained his group of admirers. His voice carried easily over the music. I swear you can't go anywhere in this town without bumping into some actor trying to look humble, he declared, grinning toward the back where Keanu Saturday. Didn't think movie stars came without bodyguards. Or is this a new trend, celebrity minimalism? His friends burst out laughing. Even a few strangers chuckled, glancing over their shoulders toward Keanu's table. The sound spread through the room like a spark through dry grass, soft at first, then sharper, feeding on itself. Keanu glanced up from his glass of water, calm and composed. His expression didn't change, not even slightly. He caught Victor's eye from across the room and simply raised his glass in a polite toast, as if acknowledging the humor without taking offense. That simple gesture silenced a few people who didn't know whether to laugh or feel embarrassed. Marjorie shifted in her seat, her hands tightening around her napkin. "That man should be ashamed," she whispered. "You're sitting here supporting a cause he probably uses as a photo opportunity, and he mocks you for being genuine." Keanu turned slightly toward her, his tone gentle. "They're not bad people," he said softly. "They just forgot what giving means." Marjorie stared at him for a moment, trying to decide if his calm was wisdom or restraint. She sighed and nodded. "You have more patience than I ever could." The auction resumed, but the tension lingered. Victor, emboldened by the attention, leaned toward another guest and said just loud enough for others to hear, "Maybe he's here for the free dinner. Heard he lives like a monk." The crowd chuckled again, not out of cruelty, but out of a desire to belong to the laughter. Keanu smiled faintly, resting his elbows on the table. He had seen it all before, the way people mocked what they didn't understand. Fame had taught him how shallow admiration could turn to ridicule when humility replaced spectacle. But he also knew that responding with anger only fed the cycle. So he did what few in that room could. He stayed still. The auctioneer's voice tried to reclaim attention, calling out bids for the next luxury item, but the earlier mockery hung in the air, invisible yet palpable. A few guests at nearby tables began to notice Keanu's composure. Some even looked uneasy, realizing that the man being ridiculed wasn't offended at all. He was quietly dignified. Victor Lane leaned back in his chair, proud of himself for entertaining the room. He had built his entire career on being the loudest voice wherever he went. A famous producer with a string of hit films and a reputation for arrogance, Victor thrived on attention. The moment he realized the crowd's laughter had quieted, he searched for another opportunity to stir them up. Again, he looked toward the back of the ballroom and smirked. "I almost didn't recognize him without the cameras," he said. "Maybe he's here rehearsing for a role the humble guest, coming soon to theaters." His table roared again. Marjorie's lips tightened. "That man doesn't know decency if it sat across from him," she muttered. Keanu smiled gently. "He's just playing his part. You're letting him make a fool of himself," she said. He looked toward Victor and shrugged lightly. "He doesn't need my help with that." The answer made Marjorie laugh quietly, the tension easing for a moment. She leaned back and observed him, struck by how unaffected he seemed. There was no bitterness, no hint of pride, just calm acceptance, as if mockery couldn't touch him. Across the room, Victor's laughter finally drew the attention of the event organizer, a woman named Dana Cartwright, who managed the hospital's fundraising team. She walked past his table with a measured smile. "Victor, let's keep the mood generous, shall we?" she said politely but firmly. Victor chuckled. "Oh, come on, Dana. It's all in good fun. You know, I've been your biggest donor for years." "Yes," she said, meeting his eyes. "But I also know that tonight isn't about egos. It's about saving children's lives. So let's keep the jokes on the stage, not at other people's expense." The subtle reprimand sent a wave of discomfort through Victor's entourage. He laughed it off, but his expression hardened for a moment. The power dynamic had shifted ever so slightly. Meanwhile, at Keanu's table, Marjorie sighed in relief. "I wish I could bottle whatever peace you have," she said softly. Keanu smiled. "It's not peace, it's perspective. When people try to put you down, they're usually standing on their own insecurity." The next auction item, a vintage sports car, was rolled onto the stage, and attention drifted back toward the spotlight. The crowd's laughter quieted as the auctioneer began his enthusiastic pitch. Victor joined in the bidding, his voice loud again, trying to regain dominance. He raised his paddle with a flourish, earning approving looks. Keanu stayed silent, observing the spectacle. He had no interest in competing with noise. To him, giving was not a contest. It was a reflection of character, and tonight, his turn to act hadn't come yet. The bidding on the sports car ended with Victor Lane's triumphant smile. He raised his paddle one final time, sealing the deal at nearly $500,000. The crowd applauded as though watching a performance, and Victor basked in it, standing briefly to wave. "All for the kids," he announced, his voice carrying just enough sincerity to mask the self-congratulation beneath it. Cameras flashed again. The applause lingered, but it felt hollow. Keanu joined in the clapping, his expression kind and genuine. Marjorie noticed the small smile that tugged at his mouth. "You really meant what you said," she whispered. "You don't see bad people, even when they're right in front of you." He nodded slightly. "Everyone's fighting their own kind of emptiness. Some fill it with noise, others with silence." Marjorie leaned closer. "And what do you fill yours with?" He glanced toward the stage where the next item, a handcrafted violin donated by a local musician, was being prepared. "With gratitude," he said softly. "It's the one thing they can't mock." Her eyes glistened. "You're not like anyone else here." Keanu chuckled lightly. "That's not always a compliment." Victor, having returned to his seat, glanced toward Keanu again, noticing the calm that still surrounded him. It bothered him in a way he couldn't explain. People usually reacted, defended themselves, cracked back, or tried to win the crowd over. But Keanu didn't. That silence was louder than any retort, and for the first time all night, Victor felt slightly foolish. Still, pride wouldn't let him admit it. "Some people act humble just to make everyone else look bad," he muttered to his companion. "You'll see, he's waiting for a big show of generosity. They always do." Keanu caught none of this. He was still listening to Marjorie talk about the children's ward, the tiny beds, the machines, the parents who cried quietly in waiting rooms. Her words pulled his thoughts away from the noise and toward what truly mattered. He pictured the faces of those children, the families who depended on nights like this one. It reminded him why he had come in the first place. As the evening continued, the laughter resumed, the wine flowed, and the lights sparkled. But beneath the polished surface, a subtle tension began to form. Some guests now watched Keanu not with mockery, but with curiosity. There was something disarming about his stillness, something magnetic about a man who didn't need to prove himself. The night was far from over, but in that quiet corner of the ballroom, a shift had begun, one that would soon turn the evening's ridicule into revelation. The night wore on, and with every passing minute, the energy in the ballroom shifted further away from compassion and closer to vanity. The auctioneer's voice rose and fell like a well-rehearsed melody, selling not charity but spectacle. A yacht week in the Mediterranean went for $400,000. A private dinner with a celebrity chef reached nearly $200,000. Then came a diamond bracelet once owned by royalty, fetching more applause than the mention of the children's hospital it was meant to help. Keanu sat quietly, his gaze drifting from the glittering stage to the tables around him. The laughter was louder now, fueled by alcohol and pride. Guests clinked their glasses and congratulated one another, though few seemed to remember what the fundraiser was truly for. A man who had just spent $500,000 on a watch leaned back in satisfaction, murmuring to his companion, "Now that's generosity." Marjorie, sitting beside Keanu, sighed softly. Generosity, maybe, but for who? He didn't answer right away. His attention had shifted toward the far corner of the room, where a small table sat apart from the others. There, under the edge of dim light, a man in a gray suit watched the proceedings quietly. His posture was straight, his expression weary but kind. Keanu noticed how his hands occasionally clenched and released, like someone trying to hide worry. "That's Dr. Whitmore," Marjorie whispered when she saw where Keanu was looking. "He's the medical director of the hospital. You can tell a lot about how things are going just by watching him." Keanu nodded slightly. "He looks tired." "He always does," she said. "He's been trying for years to expand the children's wing. The building's too small. Some nights they have to turn families away." Keanu's eyes softened. He could see it, the kind of fatigue that came not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of responsibility. The doctor wasn't mingling with the donors or chasing attention. He sat quietly, his focus on the mission, not the money. That quiet dedication resonated with Keanu deeply. A burst of laughter drew his attention back to the main floor. Victor Lane was holding up his paddle again, bidding on a custom luxury retreat. $500,000, because why not? He shouted. earning cheers. The auctioneer's gavel hit the podium, sealing another extravagant win. The applause was thunderous, but for all the noise, the cause felt more distant than ever. Keanu looked again at Dr. Whitmore, then at the hospital's logo, printed discreetly on the program beside his plate. In that moment, a thought settled quietly inside him. If the night had turned into a contest of wealth, then perhaps it was time someone reminded them of the reason they had gathered in the first place. As the next item came on stage, the atmosphere in the ballroom grew louder and looser. The champagne had done its work. The auctioneer's words barely rose above the chatter of people trying to outshine one another in conversation. He presented a 7-night private yacht charter through the Greek Isles, complete with a personal chef, onboard spa, and helicopter transfers. The starting bid was $300,000. A woman in a shimmering emerald gown raised her paddle first, her diamonds catching the light. Then a man near the front, an oil magnate, jumped in with a counterbid. Within seconds, the bidding escalated, turning into a verbal duel of vanity. 400,000, 450, $500,000. Each new number drew applause. The auctioneer, sweating under the stage lights, called out the rising figures like a sports commentator. The hospital's name was mentioned only in passing, drowned beneath the excitement of conquest. Keanu watched it unfold in silence. The laughter, the cheers, the bragging, it was all theater. He noticed Marjorie's expression dimming beside him, her eyes flicking between the bidders and the quiet doctor still sitting alone at his corner table. She leaned closer and whispered, "That money could fund the children's wing for 2 years. 2 years." Keanu's brow furrowed slightly. "And yet, they'll forget why they spent it by tomorrow." Marjorie nodded, her voice tinged with sadness. "When my granddaughter was sick, Dr. Whitmore never left her side. I once saw him sleep in a chair just to make sure she wasn't alone when she woke up. People like him don't get applause. They just keep giving." Keanu followed her gaze back to the doctor. His suit was modest, his tie slightly loose. The exhaustion on his face told a deeper story than any of the night's speeches. Keanu wondered how many nights the man had gone home, unsure how to stretch the hospital's budget, how many times he'd had to choose which child could receive treatment first. A ripple of laughter broke through his thoughts. Victor Lane was once again making himself the center of attention. "Let's be honest," Victor boasted loudly. "Half these bids are tax write-offs. If it wasn't for that, no one here would be so generous." His companions laughed, though uneasily. Even they could sense the sharpness in his tone. Keanu's eyes lingered on Victor for a moment, then returned to the stage. The auctioneer was closing another bid, hammer striking hard against the podium. The crowd cheered. But for the first time that night, Keanu didn't hear it. As applause, it sounded like noise drowning out something sacred. He sat back, his mind quiet but resolute. If everyone else was here to be seen giving, he would give for the reason they had forgotten. The auctioneer announced a short break before the next round of bidding. Waiters filled glasses, guests stood to mingle, and laughter echoed again across the golden room. Keanu remained seated, lost in quiet thought, watching Dr. Whitmore at the corner table. The man looked down at a clipboard in his hands, scanning figures, his brow furrowed. It was clear he wasn't counting donations out of greed, he was counting them out of need. Every missing dollar meant another child waiting for care that might never come. Marjorie followed Keanu's gaze and whispered, "They set a target of $8 million tonight." But most of what's been raised so far came from items that have nothing to do with the hospital itself. You can tell by his face they're still short. Keanu exhaled slowly, his eyes soft but determined. He shouldn't have to worry about saving lives while pretending to celebrate. Marjorie gave a faint smile. That's what happens when good people fight battles in rooms full of pride. They carry hope in silence while others compete for applause. Her words hung in the air. Around them, Victor Lane continued to perform for his circle of admirers, recounting how he'd saved the night with his earlier bids. The crowd indulged him because wealth, in this room, spoke louder than sincerity. But Keanu had seen enough of that kind of world to recognize its emptiness. He took a sip of water, his calm eyes fixed on the stage, and spoke almost to himself. There's a point where giving stops being about the heart and starts being about control. Maybe someone just needs to remind them what giving was meant to be. Marjorie looked at him carefully. And who's going to do that? Keanu met her eyes for a moment, and though he said nothing, something in his expression answered for him. The faintest flicker of purpose crossed his face, a thought beginning to form, steady and unshakable. The band started to play softly as the guests returned to their seats, unaware that the next chapter of the evening was about to turn. The lights glimmered off glasses and jewels, but Keanu's focus was elsewhere. He glanced once more at Dr. Whitmore, whose tired eyes betrayed a man carrying the weight of hundreds of children's futures. Keanu leaned back in his chair, quiet but resolved. There was still one item left to auction. One moment left to change the tone of the entire night. And he already knew exactly what he was going to do when that moment came. As the night neared its end, the auctioneer returned to the stage with a wide smile and a slight gleam of exhaustion in his eyes. The energy in the ballroom had begun to fade, replaced by the sluggish satisfaction of people who believed they had already done enough. The wine glasses were half empty, the laughter looser, the conversations more careless. The auctioneer lifted his microphone and called for attention. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached our final item of the evening. This one holds a very special meaning to the hospital we're supporting tonight. A few guests clapped half-heartedly, expecting another luxury item to close the show. The curtains behind the stage parted, and a young woman stepped forward, holding a modest-sized canvas framed in walnut. She was slender, her brown hair tied in a loose bun, her dress simple and unadorned. Her nervousness was visible in every small movement. How she held the painting close to her chest. How her eyes darted toward the crowd, searching for kindness and finding mostly indifference. This, the auctioneer continued, is a piece created by Ella Martin, a 2-3-year-old artist who, as a child, received life-saving treatment at the very hospital we are here to support. The painting is titled Hands That Heal. The spotlight softened as the painting was placed on an easel. Under the golden glow, the image came alive, a nurse's hands cradling a small child's hand, both illuminated by a warm, gentle light. It was simple but powerful, an image that spoke to care, hope, and connection. The audience gave polite applause, the kind reserved for moments of expected civility. A few smiled politely, but most returned to sipping their drinks. Keanu leaned forward, studying the artwork with quiet attention. The brushstrokes were delicate, deliberate. It wasn't a painting made to impress. It was one made to remember. Marjorie noticed his focus and whispered, "That girl's been painting in the hospital's art therapy program for years. They said she used to draw pictures for the nurses who cared for her." Keanu's eyes softened. "You can feel that in her work." The auctioneer cleared his throat. "We'll start the bidding at $10,000. A brief silence followed. A few guests exchanged glances, hesitant. Then someone in the middle of the room chuckled. $10,000 for a sentimental doodle? Laughter rippled across the tables. Ella froze where she stood, her knuckles tightening on the hem of her dress. Her lips trembled, but she tried to smile. The auctioneer kept his composure, forcing optimism into his tone. "It's not just art, ladies and gentlemen. It's a story of survival and of gratitude." Still, no hands went up. The silence stretched longer than it should have, filling the space between the chandeliers and the stage. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked toward their companions as if to say, someone else should bid first. The auctioneer tapped the microphone gently, his voice measured but slightly strained. $10,000, anyone? From the front row, Victor Lane leaned back and smirked. "Come on, it's cute, but let's be honest, it doesn't exactly match anyone's living room." A few people around him chuckled. The laughter was quiet, but sharp enough for Ella to hear. Her eyes flickered downward, her shoulders curling slightly inward, as though she wanted to disappear into the floor. Marjorie's jaw tightened. "Unbelievable," she whispered. They'll spend $500,000 on a vacation but can't see the worth in a painting made from gratitude. Keanu didn't respond right away. His gaze stayed on the stage, steady and unblinking. He noticed how Ella's fingers trembled as she tried to steady the frame, how her breath hitched when another guest muttered something dismissive under his breath. But he also saw something else, a quiet endurance in her stance, a refusal to completely surrender her dignity. The auctioneer tried again, lowering the starting bid. "All right, shall we begin at $5,000? Still, the hesitation hung heavy. A few people shifted in their chairs. One woman laughed softly and whispered, "Bless her heart." From the far end of the room, Dr. Whitmore sat motionless, his eyes on Ella. Keanu could tell the doctor wanted to help but couldn't. The hospital was stretched thin, and every cent he had went back into it. Even his suit looked worn under the ballroom's harsh lights. Keanu's chest tightened. He had seen that look before, the helplessness of someone who believed deeply in something but lacked the means to protect it. The auctioneer forced a laugh, trying to lighten the mood. "Surely, ladies and gentlemen, someone would like to own this lovely piece. It's not just a painting, it's a reminder of why we're all here." The crowd murmured, but no one moved. The laughter from Victor's table resumed, softer now, but still smug. "If she wants bids," Victor whispered, "she should have painted something expensive looking. Charity is about presentation." Keanu turned his head slightly in Victor's direction, but said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence carried more weight than words ever could. He returned his attention to Ella, who stood frozen beside her painting. Her lips formed a shaky smile, her eyes glistening with the effort to stay composed. Marjorie whispered, "That girl's heart is on that canvas, and they're laughing at it." Keanu's eyes remained on the young artist. Then maybe it's time someone reminded them what heart really looks like. The room's laughter began to fade, replaced by an uneasy quiet. The auctioneer looked out over the crowd, scanning for any raised hand that might break the tension. "We'll start the bidding at $3,000. He tried again, his tone softening. "Surely someone will give this piece a home." Still, no movement. Ella's chest rose and fell unevenly as she forced herself to stand tall. The lights above her seemed too bright, too harsh. Her painting, so full of compassion, felt suddenly out of place in a room where pride weighed heavier than empathy. Marjorie leaned forward, her voice trembling with frustration. "This is shameful. All night they've applauded excess, and now, when faced with something made from love, they turn their backs." Keanu didn't answer. His gaze stayed on Ella. She looked so small against the stage backdrop, her youth and sincerity making the indifference of the room almost unbearable. He could see it in her eyes, the same quiet resolve he'd carried his whole life. That unspoken decision to keep believing in goodness, even when the world made it hard. The auctioneer cleared his throat, his voice faltering slightly. 3,000? 2,000? Perhaps even 1? He looked toward Dr. Whitmore, who could only shake his head in apology. The doctor's expression held pride, but also heartbreak. From the front table, Victor Lane let out a low chuckle. "Guess charity doesn't always sell," he said, swirling the last of his champagne. The comment earned a few awkward laughs, but it broke something in the air. Something that made even the auctioneer hesitate. Keanu felt the moment shift inside him. He looked once more at Ella, at her trembling hands and the painting that meant more than any diamond or yacht could. Then, with quiet resolve, he reached for the paddle lying in front of him. His hand rose slowly, but firmly. $150,000, he said. The entire room went still. The laughter died in an instant. Heads turned, eyes widening as whispers rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer froze, his mouth opened slightly before he stammered. $150,000 from Mr. Reeves? Keanu nodded calmly. "That's right." Ella gasped softly, her eyes filling with tears. The silence stretched for several seconds before the gavel came down hard. "Sold," the auctioneer announced, his voice breaking slightly. Applause erupted, but this time it wasn't from vanity or excitement. It came slowly, sincerely, from people realizing they had just witnessed something different. Marjorie exhaled, eyes glistening. "You just changed this room, Mr. Reeves." Keanu looked toward the young artist, offering her a gentle nod. "No," he said softly. She did. The ballroom was quieter than it had been all evening. The laughter had dimmed, the clinking of glasses had stopped. The auctioneer stood poised with his microphone, looking out at the rows of indifferent faces. "We'll begin the bidding at $10,000, he said again, his tone optimistic but cracking at the edges. A man in a navy suit near the front raised his paddle lazily. $10,000, he said, almost as if to end the uncomfortable silence. The crowd clapped politely, but it was the kind of applause meant to fill the void, not celebrate generosity. The auctioneer nodded quickly. "Thank you, sir. We have 10,000. Do I hear 15? A few heads turned. Another bidder, an executive with slick back hair and a gold watch, lifted his paddle with a smirk. 15,000, he said, earning a chuckle from his companions. 15,000, wonderful, the auctioneer called. Do I hear 20? No one responded. Instead, a faint laugh came from somewhere in the middle of the room. That's enough for a painting like that, someone whispered. The comment drew a few quiet snickers, spreading like smoke through the tables. Ella stood near the stage, her shoulders shrinking. She forced a smile, but her eyes were glassy with disappointment. From his table near the back, Keanu noticed. He could see the way her knuckles pressed white against the edge of her dress, the way her chest rose unevenly with each shallow breath. The doctor in the corner sat still, his fingers interlaced on the table, his eyes heavy with understanding. He knew how important this moment had been, meant to be, the heartfelt ending to a night dominated by vanity. But instead of hope, it was becoming another display of indifference. The auctioneer tried again, his voice faltering slightly. Do I hear 20,000? The silence was broken by Victor Lane's familiar drawl. I'll bid 25,000, he said, smirking as he leaned back in his chair. His tone wasn't generous, it was mocking, as though he wanted to turn the moment into a joke. His friends laughed quietly. What? It's for the kids, he added, prompting another round of amusement. Ella's lip quivered. She nodded politely toward him, whispering something like, "Thank you," though her voice barely carried. Marjorie's hand trembled slightly as she set her glass down. "He's making a show out of kindness," she whispered to Keanu, "and the room's letting him." Keanu didn't answer. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked again toward the stage, his eyes softening as they met Ella's. There was a quiet strength there, a flicker of courage despite the humiliation surrounding her. Something deep inside him stirred. He remembered Marjorie's words from earlier in the night. Some people give money, others give heart. He had stayed silent long enough. The auctioneer cleared his throat and tried once more to keep the evening alive. We have 25,000. Do I hear 30? His tone carried an edge of desperation, though he masked it behind a forced smile. A man near the bar raised his paddle lazily. 30,000, he said, not out of conviction but because the silence felt awkward. A few polite claps followed, scattered and uncertain. The auctioneer's enthusiasm sounded rehearsed now. 30,000. Thank you, sir. Any advance on 30? No one spoke. The clapping faded quickly. From his table, Victor Lane leaned toward his companions and said just loud enough to be heard, "That's what happens when charity tries to sell sentiment instead of status." His laughter came sharp, followed by a few murmurs of agreement from his table. The arrogance in his voice hung in the air, souring the room. Ella stood frozen near the stage, her eyes blinking fast as if she were fighting to keep her composure. Her fingers brushed against the wooden edge of the easel, steadying herself. In a moment, she looked toward Dr. Whitmore, who gave her a small, reassuring nod. But even his encouragement couldn't hide the sorrow in his face. This was supposed to be the night they ended with hope, a symbol that compassion could still win over ego. Instead, it felt like another quiet defeat. Keanu's eyes moved between them, the doctor, the painting, the young artist standing alone under the glare of judgment. He had seen that expression before in people who had poured their hearts into something, only to have it dismissed by those too shallow to understand it. It wasn't just disappointment he saw. It was heartbreak disguised as endurance. Marjorie sighed beside him. "It's a cruel thing," she said softly, "watching people lose faith right in front of you." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "Faith doesn't get lost. It just waits for someone to notice it again." She turned to him. "And who's going to do that here?" He looked at her briefly, then back toward the stage. "Maybe someone who's been where she's standing now." At the front, the auctioneer hesitated before trying one last time. 30,000 going once, going twice. His voice trailed off as the murmuring resumed, a wave of indifference filling the space where applause should have been. Keanu could feel the emptiness of the moment pressing against him, the same hollowness that came whenever people forgot why giving mattered. Then he thought of Ella's courage, the hospital's children, and the tired doctor counting miracles on borrowed time. A calm resolve settled in him. It wasn't anger that filled his chest, it was clarity. He straightened his back slightly, his hand resting near his paddle. The noise around him faded, replaced by the quiet sound of his own breath. It was time. The auctioneer hesitated, glancing down at his list before sighing softly into the microphone. "Going twice." His voice wavered, the words carrying through the silent ballroom. Guests began turning toward one another, preparing to applaud and move on. To them, it was just another item, another performance wrapped in charity. But to Keanu, it wasn't over. He reached for the paddle resting beside his plate. His movements were calm, deliberate, and unhurried. He raised it slightly, then lifted it higher so there could be no mistake. The motion was so subtle at first that only Marjorie noticed. Then the auctioneer froze mid-sentence, eyes widening. "Yes, sir?" he asked cautiously, leaning forward to confirm what he thought he'd seen. Keanu's voice was quiet, but clear. $150,000. For a moment, no one breathed. The sound seemed to vanish from the room entirely, replaced by disbelief. Heads turned. A murmur rippled through the crowd like wind brushing over glass. The auctioneer blinked twice, unable to hide his astonishment. "I'm sorry, sir. Did you say 150,000? Keanu nodded once, his tone steady. "Yes." Gasps broke the silence, followed by scattered whispers. Victor Lane's smirk disappeared. The other guests exchanged stunned glances. Someone at the far end whispered, "He must be joking." But Keanu's face said otherwise. His expression wasn't smug or theatrical, it was composed, almost serene. The auctioneer straightened, visibly moved. "We have 150,000 from Mr. Reeves." His voice trembled slightly as he repeated it, as though speaking the words aloud might make them more real. "Do I hear 160? No one spoke. The room was motionless. The energy transformed in an instant. The laughter, the arrogance, the vanity, it all seemed to dissolve beneath the weight of what had just happened. Ella's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears that shimmered beneath the golden light. Dr. Whitmore sat back, stunned, exhaling slowly as though he'd been holding his breath for hours. Even Marjorie, who had seen countless charity events in her lifetime, couldn't hold back the emotion swelling in her chest. The auctioneer gave one final call. Going once, going twice. He smiled through the lump in his throat. Sold. Applause erupted, not the shallow kind that had filled the room earlier, but something real, something reverent. Marjorie turned to Keanu, her voice trembling. "You didn't just bid, you changed the meaning of tonight." Keanu smiled gently, eyes still on the young artist. "No," he said quietly. "She reminded me why it mattered." The moment Keanu's words left his lips, the ballroom froze. The chandeliers seemed to stop shimmering, the murmurs died, and even the sound of clinking glass faded into silence. Every head turned toward the back of the room where he sat, still calm, still composed. It took a few seconds for the reality of what he'd said to sink in. "Did he say 150? Someone whispered. Another voice followed quickly. "He must be joking." Victor Lane laughed under his breath, but it was a nervous laugh this time, not the confident bark from earlier. "Oh, come on," he said, glancing around for agreement. "He's not serious. No one bids that much for something like this." But the unease in his tone betrayed him. The auctioneer, still gripping his microphone, stared down at his list as if trying to confirm that what he'd just heard wasn't a hallucination. 150,000, he repeated slowly, his voice trembling slightly, then louder. 150,000, from Mr. Reeves. The murmurs spread like a wave. Cameras began flashing. The stillness of the moment cracked open into astonishment. Some guests craned their necks for a better look. Others whispered disbelief. But Keanu didn't move. He didn't smile. He didn't gesture for attention. He simply sat there, eyes fixed on the stage, his expression as serene as if he'd ordered coffee instead of rewriting the meaning of the night. At the edge of the stage, Ella stood frozen. Her eyes widened, her hand covering her mouth as tears welled up. She looked at the auctioneer, then at Keanu, unable to process what was happening. For the first time all night, her painting no longer looked small or out of place. It glowed under the lights, the nurse's hands on the canvas appearing almost alive. Dr. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, his eyes glistening. The tension in his shoulders melted away. For months, he had carried the weight of keeping the hospital alive. Now, one act of humility had done what no amount of speeches or luxury prizes could restore faith. Victor forced a grin and raised his glass toward Keanu. "Well, guess we have ourselves a hero," he said, trying to sound casual. But his tone faltered halfway, and no one joined in his laughter. The air in the room had changed. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, as if the crowd didn't know whether to clap or sit in stunned silence. Marjorie broke the moment with quiet grace, beginning to clap slowly. Her eyes didn't leave Keanu's. "Some people give money," she whispered under her breath, "but tonight, someone gave meaning." Her applause spread, one table at a time, until the entire room was on its feet, not in noisy celebration, but in humbled recognition. The auctioneer smiled through watery eyes. "Sold," he said, voice trembling with emotion, "to Mr. Keanu Reeves for $150,000. As the gavel struck the podium, the sound echoed like a closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. Ella's tears spilled freely now. Her painting had found not just a buyer, but a purpose. Keanu nodded once toward her, his expression warm but modest. He hadn't bought the painting to make a statement, he had bought it to remind everyone what generosity truly looked like. The applause continued, softer now, but richer in meaning. It wasn't the sound of celebration. It was the sound of realization. For the first time that evening, people weren't clapping for themselves. They were clapping for something pure, something they had almost forgotten existed. Ella wiped her eyes, still trying to process what had just happened. She stepped forward slowly, trembling, her voice barely a whisper as she said, "Thank you." It wasn't loud enough for everyone to hear, but Keanu did. He smiled faintly and nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of her courage and her art. The auctioneer composed himself, clearing his throat as he leaned toward the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his tone unsteady but filled with pride. "This incredible act of generosity brings us not just closer to our goal tonight, it reminds us why we're here." He paused, glancing toward Keanu. "Mr. Reeves, your gift will fund a new wing, but more importantly, it has restored the heart of this evening." Applause grew again, more genuine now. The clinking glasses stopped, the casual laughter died down, and even Victor Lane looked uncertain of what to do. His smirk had vanished entirely. He turned toward his companions and muttered something, but the words fell flat. No one was laughing with him anymore. Dr. Whitmore stood slowly from his chair, clapping harder than anyone else. For a man usually reserved, his emotion showed plainly. His voice caught as he said to no one in particular, "That's the kind of giving that saves lives." His words, though quiet, carried far enough to reach the nearby tables, and soon others nodded in agreement. The auctioneer wiped the corner of his eye and raised the microphone again. "Tonight, we've seen many acts of generosity," he said. "But what we've witnessed just now, that's something beyond generosity. That's grace." Ella stepped closer to the edge of the stage, clutching the side of her painting, her tears flowing freely now. When she looked at Keanu, she didn't see a celebrity. She saw the child she once was, lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by nurses whose kindness had given her the will to survive. Her painting had been her thank you to them, and now it was his thank you to her. Marjorie leaned toward Keanu, her voice trembling. "You could have just written a check, but you gave something bigger than money." Keanu kept his gaze on Ella and said softly, "Sometimes people don't need to see numbers. They need to see meaning." As if on cue, a photographer snapped a picture the moment captured forever. Keanu sitting quietly, his paddle resting on the table, while the young artist on stage wept beside her painting. It wasn't a picture of wealth. It was a portrait of humility, meeting hope. When the applause finally faded, the host of the evening approached the microphone, her voice breaking slightly. "Before we close tonight," she said, "I want to say this. We often think charity is about money, but tonight we've been reminded that the most powerful thing anyone can give is heart." People began to stand, not to leave, but to show respect. Even those who had mocked him earlier stood silently, their eyes lowered. Vanity had met humility, and humility had won. Keanu looked down for a moment, then back up at Ella, whose tears had turned to a trembling smile. For the first time all night, the ballroom felt human again. The applause was still echoing when Keanu rose quietly from his chair. The auctioneer, still overcome by the moment, began to speak. But Keanu lifted a hand slightly, signaling that he had something to say. The crowd fell into silence again, expecting perhaps a short speech of gratitude or acknowledgement. Instead, Keanu's voice came out calm, almost gentle, yet every word carried through the ballroom. "I'd like to make one small request," he said. "Please donate the painting to the hospital. Let the children have it." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The words seemed to hang in the air, suspended between disbelief and reverence. Then the murmurs started. "Did he just say donate it?" a woman whispered. Another voice followed. "To the hospital?" The shock rippled through the tables like an unseen wave. Victor Lane, who had been hiding behind his champagne glass, froze mid-sip. He blinked twice, looking at Keanu as if trying to process what he'd heard. For once, there was no smirk on his face, only silence. The auctioneer stared at Keanu, mouth slightly open, before lowering the microphone and stepping closer to the edge of the stage. "Mr. Reeves," he said softly, I want to make sure I heard correctly. You wish to donate the painting to the hospital itself?" Keanu nodded. "Yes, that's where it belongs." Gasps spread through the audience, followed by an unsteady hush. The host of the event covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Even Dr. Whitmore, who had held his composure all night, felt emotion rising in his throat. Ella stood motionless at the edge of the stage, her hand pressed against her chest. The tears she had fought so hard to control returned freely now, spilling down her cheeks as her lips trembled. She began, her voice breaking. "You want to give it back?" Keanu smiled gently. "Your work already belongs where it was meant to be," he said. "It came from the heart of that place. It should stay there." The auctioneer wiped at his eyes quickly and turned back to the microphone, his voice shaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Reeves has just donated his purchase back to the hospital. The painting will be displayed in the children's wing for all the patients and families to see." The room erupted not in the noisy applause from before, but in something deeper. The clapping started slowly, rising like a tide of respect. People stood again, not out of formality this time, but out of awe. Keanu didn't bow, didn't wave. He simply nodded, his eyes on Ella, who could no longer hold back her sobs. It was as if grace itself had walked quietly into the room and taken its place among them. Ella's tears came faster now, her whole body trembling with disbelief. She stepped down from the stage, clutching the edge of her dress as she approached Keanu's table. The crowd parted silently for her, giving her space, as though they were witnessing something sacred. The sound of her soft sobs echoed faintly through the stillness of the ballroom. When she reached him, she could barely form words. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. Her voice was fragile, breaking halfway through the sentence. Keanu rose from his chair and smiled gently. "I know," he said. "That's why it matters." She covered her mouth, overwhelmed, then looked up at him through tearful eyes. "That painting it was meant to thank the people who saved my life. I just wanted them to know they weren't forgotten." "They won't be," Keanu said softly, "because now every child who walks those halls will see it. They'll see what hope looks like." The audience watched in stunned silence. Even those who had mocked him earlier now stood motionless, their expressions transformed from amusement to shame. Victor Lane's hand lowered slowly from his drink. He looked down at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The smugness that had followed him all night drained from his face, replaced by something quieter, something almost human. Dr. Whitmore rose from his corner, his eyes wet. He began to clap once, slowly, deliberately. Others followed, until the sound filled the room again, rolling through the air like a wave of redemption. But this applause wasn't for spectacle. It was for grace so effortless it didn't need to be announced. The auctioneer, still emotional, turned back to the microphone. "I've been in this business for 20 years, he said, voice trembling. "I've seen people give money, cars, and homes, but I've never seen someone give with this much heart." Cameras flashed from the corners of the room, but Keanu didn't look toward them. He wasn't posing. He wasn't performing. He simply rested a hand on Ella's shoulder and whispered, "Keep painting. The world needs more of what you see." Ella nodded, her tears now replaced by a trembling smile. She turned toward the stage, holding her head higher than before. The humiliation from earlier had melted away. What remained was pride quiet. Humble pride born from being seen for who she truly was. The host of the evening, still visibly moved, stepped up beside the auctioneer. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said softly, "tonight we set out to raise money for a hospital. But what we've gained is something far greater, a reminder that kindness still has the power to humble us." The applause swelled again, this time carrying warmth through every corner of the ballroom. The wealthy, the powerful, the cynical, all of them stood together, clapping not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Even Victor joined in, though quietly, his eyes glistening. He leaned toward the person beside him and said under his breath, "Maybe I've been doing this wrong." Marjorie looked up at Keanu, her smile soft but knowing. "You've given that girl her dignity back," she said, "and you gave this room its soul." Keanu looked around, taking in the changed faces, the softened eyes, the renewed silence that followed the applause. "Maybe it was always here," he said quietly. "It just needed to be reminded." As Ella stepped back onto the stage to collect herself, the spotlight caught her painting one last time. The nurse's hands glowed in the warm light just as they had in her memory, and for a fleeting moment, the entire room seemed to understand the true meaning of healing. As dessert was served, the atmosphere in the ballroom had transformed completely. The same tables that once echoed with laughter and pride were now filled with hushed conversations and thoughtful glances. Crystal glasses still sparkled under the chandeliers, but the energy around them had softened. People spoke quietly, not out of boredom, but reverence. It was as if the room itself was exhaling for the first time that night. The waiters moved carefully between tables, their trays trembling slightly as though they too felt the shift in air. Even the music from the band had changed softer, slower, almost reflective. The night no longer belonged to the wealthy or the glamorous. It belonged to the humble act that had reminded everyone what true generosity looked like. Victor Lane sat at his table, staring into his untouched glass of champagne. The usual arrogance on his face was gone. He looked smaller somehow, not in stature, but in presence. Around him, his friends were quiet too, avoiding eye contact. unsure of what to say. A woman beside him finally spoke, her voice gentle. "He didn't even make a speech," she said. "He just gave." Victor nodded slowly, his voice subdued, and made every one of us realize what we weren't doing. At another table, a well-known business magnate whispered to his wife, "I've donated more money than I can count, but I've never felt what I felt tonight. That wasn't charity, it was humanity." She nodded, wiping a tear discreetly from her cheek. Reporters, once eager for gossip and quotes from celebrities, now found themselves quietly scribbling notes of reflection. Instead, the tone of the evening had changed from luxury to legacy. One journalist in particular, a young man named Chris Nolan, sat hunched over his notepad, his pen moving quickly as he wrote a single line. The richest person in the room was the one who did not flaunt his wealth. At Keanu's table, Marjorie leaned toward him, her voice soft but firm. "You didn't just donate money," she said. "You gave them perspective." Keanu smiled faintly, his eyes distant, still watching Ella's painting where it stood under the dim light. "Perspective is worth more than applause," he said. Marjorie nodded. "It's strange. I've been to 100 of these galas, and I've never seen people quiet for the right reasons." He looked around. Maybe they just needed a reminder of what it feels like to care again. She smiled, her eyes misty. "You reminded them that grace doesn't need a microphone." Across the room, Ella stood speaking quietly with Dr. Whitmore. Her cheeks were still damp with tears, but her smile was radiant now. The doctor's shoulders looked lighter, his posture more relaxed. When their conversation ended, she glanced toward Keanu's table, hesitated for a moment, then started walking toward him. The crowd noticed. Some whispered softly, others smiled. It was a simple moment, a young artist approaching the man who had changed her life. But to everyone watching, it felt like the closing of a story that would be told for years to come. When Ella reached his table, she stopped, unsure of how to begin. "Mr. Reeves," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "You believed in my art when no one did." Keanu looked up at her kindly. "The world needs reminders of kindness," he said. "Your painting does that better than words." Her eyes filled again. With a laugh, quiet and free. Ella stood for a moment, speechless, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She had imagined hundreds of ways this night might end, but none like this. Around them, people were watching with quiet reverence. There was no envy now, no murmurs of gossip, only respect. She finally found her voice again. "I painted it because I wanted people to remember what I felt as a child in that hospital. I remember the nurses who smiled even when they were tired, the doctors who gave hope even when the odds were bad. I wanted to capture that." Keanu nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You did more than capture it," he said. "You gave it back to the world. Every person who sees that painting will feel what you felt." Ella looked down, trying to stop herself from crying again. "I didn't think anyone would understand." Keanu's voice softened. "People understand kindness, even when they've forgotten it for a while." Behind them, Marjorie smiled through glistening eyes. The words struck something in her. She leaned back, letting the moment unfold. Around the ballroom, the tone of every conversation had changed. Those who had once compared watches or bragged about yachts now spoke in whispers about purpose and gratitude. At one table, an actress was telling her assistant to arrange a visit to the hospital. At another, a couple quietly decided to match Keanu's donation anonymously. Dr. Whitmore's phone began buzzing with messages from guests asking how they could help the hospital directly. The change was real, not just polite. Victor Lane remained seated, deep in thought. For the first time in years, he felt the sting of humility, a feeling both uncomfortable and strangely freeing. He glanced at Keanu from across the room. Their eyes met briefly. Keanu gave a small nod, not of superiority, but understanding. Victor looked down again and exhaled. It was the first time all evening he didn't feel the need to speak. A few reporters approached carefully, not wanting to intrude. One of them, Chris Nolan, the young journalist, stood nearby with his notepad. He wasn't looking for a quote. He was just watching, absorbing, realizing that he was witnessing the kind of story that didn't need embellishment. He wrote quietly, "True class has nothing to do with money and everything to do with grace." The host of the event approached Keanu's table, her smile still trembling. "Mr. Reeves," she said softly, "you've done more than anyone tonight. I don't know how to thank you." Keanu shook his head gently. "You don't need to thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing. The hospital changes lives. This was just my way of saying thank you for that." Her eyes glistened as she nodded. "You reminded all of us why we started this in the first place." As the band began to play again, the guests stayed seated longer than usual, reluctant to let the night end. There was a feeling in the air, something quiet, fragile, and good. For the first time all evening, wealth and fame didn't matter. What mattered was that everyone in the room had been reminded of something far greater than themselves. Marjorie leaned closer to Keanu one last time, her voice barely above a whisper. "You gave them a story they'll never forget." He smiled, looking once more toward the glowing painting. "No," he said softly. "She did." By the time dawn broke over Los Angeles, the night before had already turned into something bigger than anyone expected. Photos of Keanu standing beside Ella's painting had flooded every major social media platform. The image was simple but powerful, his calm smile beside the tearful young artist, the painting glowing softly behind them. It didn't need captions. The image spoke for itself. Within hours, hashtags began trending across the internet. Number hands that heal, number Keanu's gift, number grace in silence. News outlets scrambled to cover the story, each adding their version of the same headline. Keanu Reeves donates $150,000 and painting to Children's Hospital. Television anchors discussed it between segments, marveling at how one quiet gesture had shifted the tone of an entire high society event. Some framed it as a story of celebrity humility, others as a lesson in true generosity. But the article that resonated most deeply came from a small online column written by the young journalist who had been there that night, Chris Nolan. He wasn't a household name, not yet. He wrote for a modest cultural publication known for thoughtful commentary rather than gossip. That morning, he sat in a quiet corner cafe, his coffee cooling beside his laptop as his fingers moved across the keyboard with purpose. The headline was the first thing that came to him. The richest person in the room was the one who didn't flaunt his wealth. In his article, Chris described the moment not as spectacle but as transformation. "It wasn't about money," he wrote. "It was about what money could mean when guided by humility. I watched a room full of power and privilege fall silent, not because someone shouted, but because someone showed them how to listen again." He wrote about Ella's trembling voice, the laughter that had once filled the room, and how everything changed when Keanu quietly lifted his paddle. He described the way people looked at themselves differently. Afterward, how they spoke more softly, how even pride bowed to grace. By the time the article went live, it began spreading faster than Chris had ever seen. Readers shared it with captions like, "Faith in humanity restored," and "This is the kind of news we need." Within hours, it was featured on major platforms. The story climbed to the top of trending lists, carried by the hunger of people craving something real, something kind, something that reminded them that good still existed in the world. In his closing lines, Chris wrote, "We are often told that generosity should make noise to inspire others, but sometimes the quietest act can echo the loudest." That night, Keanu Reeves didn't buy a painting, he gave the world back its reflection. The piece struck a chord everywhere. Morning shows quoted it. Radio hosts read excerpts on air. It was shared by thousands, then millions, across platforms and countries. By noon, the photo of Keanu and Ella had become the most shared image of the day. People around the world began donating to the same hospital, many leaving notes saying they were inspired by his example. And somewhere, at a small kitchen table in Los Angeles, Ella scrolled through her phone in disbelief as the story of her painting reached places she had never dreamed of. By afternoon, every major outlet in the country had picked up the story. Morning shows replayed footage from the gala, showing Keanu's calm face as the crowd gasped at his bid. The moment he said, "Please donate the painting to the hospital," became the quote of the day. Commentators called it a masterclass in quiet grace. Television anchors who usually spoke about scandals and red carpets now spoke about compassion. On one talk show, a guest said, "It's not just that he gave, it's how he gave." He reminded us that generosity doesn't need an audience. The clip went viral again, shared by celebrities, teachers, and nurses alike. Ella watched it all from her small apartment. The walls were still lined with unfinished canvases, the smell of paint lingering in the air. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her phone buzzing every few seconds. Messages poured in from strangers around the world, parents of sick children, young artists, hospital staff who had seen her story. One message made her cry. A nurse from her old hospital wrote, "Your painting will hang in the children's ward starting tomorrow. The staff can't stop talking about it." She took a deep breath and smiled through tears. For the first time, she felt like her art had found its purpose. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Dr. Whitmore stood with two nurses as workers carefully hung the painting in the main hallway. The nurses' hands in the painting seemed almost alive under the hospital's fluorescent light. Families stopped to look at it, reading the small plaque beneath that read, "Donated by Keanu Reeves. Painted by former patient Ella Martin, age 23. Children passing by smiled at it. One small boy with bandaged arms whispered to his mother, "That's me," pointing at the small hand in the painting. She knelt beside him, holding back tears, and said softly, "That's all of us." The moment was photographed and shared by the hospital's social media page. Within hours, the post had hundreds of thousands of likes and messages of support. People began donating to the hospital again, some $5, some $5,000, but all inspired by the same act of kindness. Back in Los Angeles, Chris Nolan sat stunned as his article continued to spread across platforms. Emails flooded his inbox, editors wanting interviews, readers thanking him for writing something uplifting. But what touched him most were the comments under the article itself. One simply read, "For once, I cried over good news." That night, as the sun set, Keanu's phone buzzed. He rarely checked social media, but messages from friends and colleagues poured in. All of them said the same thing. "You reminded us who you are and who we should be." He smiled softly at the screen, then set the phone down without replying. The noise didn't matter. What mattered was knowing that something good had reached people who needed it. As evening settled, Ella stood outside the hospital where her painting now hung. She looked up at the lit windows and whispered, "Thank you," though Keanu wasn't there to hear it. In a way, he didn't need to be. The gift had already done what it was meant to do. It had reminded the world that kindness still had the power to go viral. A week after the story had taken the world by storm, Amanda sat alone at the reception desk of the same hotel where it all began. The lobby, once bustling with confidence and chatter, felt quieter now. The marble floor reflected the morning light from the tall glass doors, and the soft hum of conversation came and went. But Amanda wasn't really listening. Her eyes were fixed on her phone screen. The article was open again, Chris Nolan's piece, the one everyone had been sharing. The richest person in the room was the one who didn't flaunt his wealth. She had read it 5 times already, yet each time her chest tightened the same way. The photos beneath the headline showed Keanu standing beside Ella's painting, his expression gentle and unassuming. Amanda's reflection stared back at her in the dark glass of the reception counter. She could still hear her own voice from that night, hesitant, uncertain, laced with quiet judgment. "You're Mr. Reeves?" she had asked, as though the name didn't belong to the man in front of her. She had double-checked the list, doubted him, even hesitated before giving him his badge. And later, when the laughter started, she hadn't said a word to stop it. Her heart ached now at the memory. Back then, she had thought he was just another celebrity trying to make an appearance. But reading the article, seeing the painting in the children's hospital, and hearing how his gesture had inspired donations from around the world, she realized how deeply she had misjudged him. She set her phone down and took a long, shaky breath. The guilt was heavier than she expected. "How could I have been so shallow?" she whispered to herself. The concierge, an older man named Paul, noticed her distant expression as he walked past. "You okay, Amanda?" he asked kindly. She looked up, startled, and forced a small smile. "Yeah, just reading something that's been hard to forget." He chuckled softly. The Reeves story. The whole city's still talking about it." Amanda nodded slowly. "I was there that night." Paul stopped, surprised. "You were?" "I checked him in," she said quietly. "And I didn't even treat him with respect. I thought he was lost, or pretending to be someone he wasn't. He was so kind, and I just..." Her voice trailed off, heavy with regret. Paul looked at her for a long moment. "We all have those moments," he said gently. "But it's what you do after that defines you." That night, Amanda sat at her small kitchen table, unable to shake the feeling. Finally, she took out a piece of stationery and began to write. Her handwriting trembled at first, but the words came honestly. "Dear Mr. Reeves, you don't know me by name, but I was the receptionist at the auction check-in. I was the one who hesitated when you gave your name. I judged you by how you looked, not by who you were. I've thought about it every day since." She paused, staring at the page, then continued. "Your grace that night taught me something I'll never forget. That kindness doesn't wear designer clothes, and humility doesn't need applause. I'm truly sorry for how I acted. Thank you for reminding me what real respect looks like." She signed her name at the bottom, folded the letter carefully, and mailed it the next morning. Days passed, and Amanda went back to her usual routine, though nothing felt quite the same. Each time someone checked into the hotel, she found herself noticing details she used to overlook: their tone, their posture, the small kindnesses they showed others. She began greeting every guest with genuine warmth, not because it was part of her job, but because she finally understood how much one gesture could mean. Weeks later, one early afternoon, a small envelope arrived at the reception desk. It was addressed in neat handwriting, with her name written clearly across the front. No return address. The hotel manager handed it to her with a curious smile. "Looks like you've got mail, Amanda." Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single folded page on heavy, cream-colored stationery. The handwriting was steady, elegant, and unmistakably personal. "Dear Amanda, thank you for your letter." I read it with a smile. "You don't owe me an apology, but I appreciate the honesty in your words. We all grow when we see ourselves clearer. What matters most is not how we start, but how we choose to see others moving forward. I've made my share of mistakes too, and I'm still learning every day. Kindness isn't about being perfect, it's about being present. You saw that moment, reflected on it, and that's something many people never do. I'm proud of you for that. Keep treating people with the same heart you showed in writing to me. The world needs more of that. With gratitude." Keanu Reeves. Amanda read it twice before she could fully take in the words. Her eyes filled with tears. It wasn't just his kindness that moved her, it was how personal it felt, how genuine. There was no condescension, no distance, just understanding. She held the letter against her chest for a long time, as if trying to capture the warmth behind those words. Then she framed it in simple wood and hung it on the wall above her small writing desk. Every morning before work, she would glance at it, reading the line that stood out most to her. "We all grow when we see ourselves clearer." That phrase became her quiet mantra. Months later, when new receptionists joined the hotel, Amanda was the one who trained them. She told them about respect, about humility, and about never assuming who someone is by how they appear. She didn't mention Keanu by name. She didn't have to. The lesson had become her own. One evening, as she closed up for the night, a couple approached the desk to thank her for her patience with their check-in. The husband smiled and said, "You've got a kindness about you. You must really love what you do." Amanda returned the smile. "I do," she said softly. "It's not about the job. It's about the people. When they left, she looked once more at the letter hanging above her desk and whispered, "Thank you." Because in the quiet that followed, she finally understood what Keanu had meant. Humility isn't weakness. It's the quiet strength that changes how we see the world. Spring came early that year, and with it came a wave of generosity no one had seen before. The story of Keanu Reeves' silent act had continued to spread, crossing borders and languages. Donations to the Children's Hospital multiplied within weeks, small and large amounts arriving from every corner of the country. Messages poured in with them, notes from families, students, and even retirees, saying they had been moved by what they read. The hospital's donation office, once quiet, now buzzed daily with activity. Dr. Whitmore worked longer hours, not out of obligation, but joy. Each new envelope or online contribution reminded him that compassion had caught fire. He often stood before Ella's painting, now mounted proudly in the hospital's main hallway, and whispered, "You started this." The hospital board decided to launch a full campaign in honor of the moment that changed everything. They called it Hands That Heal, named after Ella's painting. The image of the nurse's hands became the campaign's symbol, printed on posters, donation letters, and even hospital ID badges. Wherever it appeared, it carried a message of care that went beyond medicine. Ella, once an unknown artist, found herself in the center of something bigger than she had ever dreamed. She attended the campaign's launch, wearing the same quiet smile she'd worn the night of the auction. When reporters asked how she felt about the attention, she answered simply, "It's not about fame. It's about helping others feel seen." Her words struck a chord, and the campaign's first week brought in more funding than any previous hospital initiative in its history. Meanwhile, Keanu stayed mostly out of the spotlight. He avoided interviews, declined television appearances, and turned down offers to appear in commercials inspired by the event. When one journalist managed to ask why, his answer was brief. "The story isn't about me. It's about the painting and what it represents." Yet, even his silence made headlines. People were drawn to the purity of it, the refusal to profit from a good deed, the choice to stay humble when fame offered a louder stage. His authenticity became the very force that drew others to follow his example. Among those was Victor Lane. The once boastful producer had spent weeks replaying that night in his head. Every detail, the laughter, the smirk, the moment the crowd fell silent, haunted him. At first, it was embarrassment that lingered. But over time, that embarrassment turned into something deeper: reflection. When the hospital announced a second fundraiser, Victor arrived early, wearing a plain black suit with no entourage. He stood near the back, avoiding cameras. When his turn came to speak, his voice trembled slightly as he addressed the audience. "I was there that night," he said, "and I saw what class truly looks like. It wasn't in a suit or a number. It was in humility. I'll never forget that." Then he did something few expected. He pledged $1 million to the hospital's new wing, dedicating it in honor of Hands That Heal. The room fell silent after Victor Lane's announcement. There was no applause at first, just the quiet weight of realization. People who had once laughed with him that night now looked on with respect. When the applause finally came, it was slow, deliberate, and sincere. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about change. News of Victor's donation spread quickly, and interviews soon followed. A journalist asked him why he decided to give so much after mocking Keanu. Victor paused before answering. "Because that night," he said softly, "I saw what class truly looks like. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need attention. It just is." His words went viral almost instantly, echoing the very lesson that had started it all. The hospital released a statement thanking Victor and acknowledging how one moment of humility had sparked a wave of compassion across the country. By summer, the donations had surpassed every goal the board had set. Construction began on the hospital's new pediatric wing, a state-of-the-art facility designed to care for children with long-term illnesses. The walls were painted in soft colors chosen by the patients themselves, and in the main lobby hung a framed replica of Ella's painting, positioned beneath a simple plaque that read, "Hands That Heal," a symbol of compassion and hope. The original painting remained safely inside the hospital's heart, the children's ward, where it was visible to every young patient who passed by. Nurses often said the kids would stop in front of it during their rounds, touching the glass gently as if the warmth of the painting could comfort them. Ella was invited to see the new wing's completion. As she walked through the bright corridors lined with artwork from other child patients, she felt tears forming. When she saw the replica of her painting at the entrance, she stopped in awe. A group of children surrounded it, pointing and smiling, their laughter echoing down the hall. Dr. Whitmore joined her side, his hands in his coat pockets. "You see what you started?" he asked quietly. Ella shook her head. "I didn't start it," she said. "He did." The doctor smiled. "Maybe, but art has a way of carrying the soul of a moment. You gave people something to see, and he gave them something to feel. Together, you reminded us what healing really looks like." Meanwhile, Keanu stayed true to his quiet nature. He sent no public messages, posted nothing, and didn't attend the dedication ceremony. But a week later, the hospital received a handwritten note from him to everyone at Street. "Andrews, thank you for letting me be a small part of something beautiful. Healing doesn't just happen in hospitals, it happens in hearts. Keep doing what you do. You're the real heroes." The note was framed beside Ella's painting. Visitors often stopped to read it, touched by the simple sincerity of his words. Months later, when the hospital celebrated its milestone of helping 1,000 new children, they didn't call it a victory for donors or fame. They called it the ripple, because that was what it had become. A quiet wave of kindness that kept moving, touching lives far beyond where it began. The morning was quiet when Keanu stepped out of his car in front of Street Andrews Children's Hospital. The sun had just risen, spilling soft gold across the glass entrance. There were no reporters, no cameras, no announcements. He had made sure of that. He didn't want this to be another story for the public. He wanted to see what had become of the painting, the one that had changed so many lives, including his own. He entered the hospital through a side door, greeted only by the faint scent of fresh paint and the cheerful hum of children's laughter echoing down the hallway. The new wing was alive. Colorful murals covered the walls, smiling animals, bright skies, and stars painted by tiny hands. Nurses moved gracefully between rooms, their voices filled with warmth. A receptionist recognized him but said nothing. She simply smiled and nodded, her eyes shining with quiet respect. Keanu returned the smile, placing a finger to his lips as if to say, "Let's keep this between us." As he walked through the corridor, he noticed the framed replica of Hands That Heal, hanging in the main lobby. People had placed fresh flowers beneath it, along with thank you cards from families. Some were handwritten in crayon by children, each one saying something different. "Thank you for helping my sister. I'm not scared anymore. You made the hospital happy." He paused, reading each message, his expression softening. For all the chaos the world carried, here was proof that goodness still had roots. A familiar voice broke through the moment. "Mr. Reeves," said Dr. Whitmore, stepping out. From a nearby doorway, his white coat slightly wrinkled, but his eyes bright. "I didn't expect to see you today." Keanu shook his hand warmly. "I just wanted to visit." Quietly. The doctor smiled. "Then, you came at the perfect time. The children are painting murals today. Ella's leading them." They walked together down the hall toward a large recreation room, where soft music played. The scent of acrylic paint and laughter filled the air. Inside, children in hospital gowns and colorful hats sat at tables, brushing color across long sheets of canvas. At the center of the room stood Ella, her hair tied back, a faint streak of blue paint on her cheek. When she turned and saw him, her eyes widened in surprise, then softened with joy. "You came," she said, barely above a whisper. He smiled. "You're making this place brighter than ever." She laughed quietly, glancing at the children. "They're the real artists now. I'm just here to make sure the walls can keep up with them." One little girl tugged at Ella's sleeve and pointed toward Keanu. "Is that the man from the painting story?" Ella knelt beside her. "Yes," she said gently. "He's the man who helped build this wing." The child looked up at Keanu, grinning wide. "Thank you for making our hospital beautiful." Keanu bent slightly. smiling at her. "You already made it beautiful," he said. "I just help people notice." The doctor and Ella watched as Keanu moved through the room, greeting each child as if he had known them forever. He knelt beside a boy, painting a bright red sun, and asked what it meant. The boy replied confidently, "It's the light that never goes out." Keanu smiled, nodding. "That's a good thing to remember," he said softly. Everywhere he looked, he saw color and life. For a moment, he forgot about cameras and scripts and deadlines. This place wasn't about stories or headlines. It was about healing, the kind that didn't make the news but changed the world quietly, one life at a time. Dr. Whitmore joined him by the window, looking out toward the courtyard where volunteers were planting flowers. "You should know," he said, "the donations didn't just build this wing. They helped us hire new staff, fund pediatric research, and expand programs for kids who can't afford treatment. You gave us hope, Mr. Reeves." Keanu shook his head gently. "It wasn't me," he said. "It was everyone who remembered what giving really means. I just happened to be there when they did." The doctor smiled, his eyes glistening. "You reminded them." Sometimes people forget what kindness looks like until someone shows them again. Keanu looked back toward the children. "They're the reminder," he said quietly. "Every smile in this room is proof that good things still grow, even when the world feels heavy." "I wanted to show you something," she said, leading him toward a smaller hallway near the end of the wing. The lighting was dimmer there, softer. On the wall hung the original Hands That Heal painting, its colors glowing under a single overhead lamp. Keanu stopped and stared for a long time. The nurse's hands, the child's small fingers, the warmth between them seemed to move even now. It was more than paint on a canvas. It was the heartbeat of the entire hospital. Ella stood beside him, her voice quiet. "Every day, someone stops here. Nurses, parents, patients. Sometimes they cry. Sometimes they just stand in silence. It's become part of this place." Keanu nodded slowly. "It feels alive," he said. She smiled. "That's because it was made from gratitude." He turned to her, his expression soft. "You gave them something they can hold on to. That's rare. And you gave me the chance to share it," she replied. They stood there in silence for a while, the hum of the hospital faint in the background. It wasn't a grand moment, no speeches, no cameras, but it carried a peace neither of them could describe. Before leaving, Keanu reached into his coat pocket and placed a small folded note beneath the frame. "For the next person who stops to look," he said. Ella tilted her head. "What does it say?" He smiled. "It just says, there's still goodness in the world. Don't stop believing in it." He walked down the hall quietly, passing children's laughter and the soft hum of life continuing. As he stepped out into the morning light, he felt something rare peace. A year passed quickly, but the memory of that night, the night humility rewrote the meaning of giving, never faded. The new hospital wing had become a sanctuary not only for healing, but for hope. It was now the heart of Street Andrews, a place where stories of courage filled the hallways, and where the words, "Hands That Heal," had come to represent more than a campaign. It had become a legacy. On a bright Saturday morning, the hospital prepared to celebrate the first anniversary of the new wing. The courtyard was alive with color. Families, doctors, nurses, and former patients gathered together under white tents draped in ribbons of soft blue and gold. A small stage stood near the garden, adorned with fresh flowers and a single covered canvas. Everyone knew who had painted it, but no one had yet seen what it was. Ella stood near the edge of the stage, her hands slightly trembling as she adjusted the microphone. Time had been kind to her. The uncertainty that once haunted her eyes had been replaced by quiet confidence. She wore a simple dress, splattered with faint streaks of color, remnants of her recent work. Dr. Whitmore stood beside her, smiling proudly. "You've given this place more than art, Ella," he said. "You've given it identity." She looked toward the crowd, her voice gentle but steady. "This hospital taught me what compassion really means." It gave me life when I was just a child, and this past year, I've watched it give life to so many others. I wanted to paint something that captured the spirit of what we've built together, something that honors not fame, not wealth, but humanity." The audience fell silent as she turned toward the covered canvas. With one smooth motion, she pulled the cloth away. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The painting revealed a man kneeling before a small child, placing a glowing heart into their open hands. The man's face was left blank, undefined, but his posture humble, gentle, and sincere felt unmistakably familiar. Around them, soft light spilled outward, illuminating a background of quiet faces watching, their expressions filled with awe. Ella's eyes glistened as she spoke. "I call this piece The Quiet Giver. It's dedicated to someone who taught us that real generosity doesn't seek attention. It simply exists silently, powerfully, and endlessly." She paused, then smiled. "I dedicate this painting to Mr. Keanu Reeves, whose humility reminded the world that kindness isn't weakness, it's strength." Applause filled the courtyard, but it wasn't the loud, frantic kind. It was the kind born from deep respect. Some people wiped tears, others simply stared at the painting, as if trying to understand how something so simple could feel so profound. The hospital board announced that The Quiet Giver would hang beside Hands That Heal in the new wing, symbolizing the beginning and continuation of a movement that had changed lives far beyond the hospital walls. As the applause faded, cameras clicked quietly, capturing the moment, though this time it didn't feel like spectacle. It felt like gratitude preserved in stillness. Ella stepped back from the stage, her hands still trembling slightly, overwhelmed by the emotion in the crowd. "Doctor." Whitmore placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and whispered, "He'd be proud." She smiled softly. "I hope he knows this wasn't just for him. It's for everyone he reminded to care." Among the guests stood Amanda, the young receptionist, now volunteering at the hospital's front desk on weekends. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at the painting. She had read about the unveiling in the paper and came without telling anyone. Seeing the faceless man giving the heart to the child struck something deep inside her. It was as if the artist had painted the lesson she herself had learned. Humility is not about being small, it's about lifting others higher. Ella stepped down from the stage and was surrounded by well-wishers, doctors, and families who wanted to thank her. A reporter approached gently, recorder in hand. "Miss Martin, what inspired the faceless figure in your painting?" Ella thought for a moment before replying. "Because kindness doesn't have a face. It could be anyone. It could be you, me, or the person next to you. That's the point. It's not about who gives. It's about the act itself." Her answers spread almost as fast as the painting's image. By evening, news outlets were broadcasting the story of The Quiet Giver, showing clips from the ceremony and images of both her paintings now hanging side by side. The sight of the two, the hands in one, the heart in the other, moved viewers everywhere. But when reporters reached out to Keanu for comment, he was, as always, humble in response. He was filming overseas at the time, and when asked during a brief interview about the dedication, he smiled politely and said, "Kindness shouldn't need recognition. It should be our default." Those 8 words went viral within hours. People began sharing them across social media, printing them on posters, writing them on chalkboards in classrooms, and even painting them on walls in children's hospitals around the country. The phrase became a movement, simple, direct, and true. Dr. Whitmore had the quote engraved beneath Ella's new painting, right beside her dedication. Every visitor who walked through the entrance would read it as they entered the wing. Kindness shouldn't need recognition. It should be our default. Months later, when Keanu quietly visited the hospital again, during a brief break from filming, he found the 2 paintings hanging side by side, the heart and the hands. He stood there for a long time, smiling faintly at how they seemed to speak to each other. When Ella saw him, she approached quietly, not wanting to break the stillness. "I didn't want to paint your face," she said softly. "I wanted people to see you in the feeling, not the image." He nodded. "You did the right thing. Kindness doesn't need a name." They stood there together for a moment, neither speaking. The hallway was filled with the soft laughter of children nearby, the faint scent of antiseptic and fresh flowers blending into something oddly comforting. When Keanu finally turned to leave, he looked once more at the painting and smiled. The faceless man placing a heart into the child's hands seemed to glow more brightly under the light. Outside, the afternoon sun stretched across the hospital walls, warm and gentle. For the first time in a long time, he felt certain of something: that goodness, once awakened, never really fades. It keeps passing on, quietly, from one giver to the next. The hospital wing was quiet in the evening light. The laughter and footsteps that had filled the corridors all day had faded into a calm hum. Keanu stood alone in front of the two paintings, Hands That Heal and The Quiet Giver, their colors glowing softly under the gentle illumination above them. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His reflection in the glass merged with the faceless figure in Ella's painting, making it look as if the giver's form had finally found its shape. In that stillness, humility became visible not as a grand gesture, but as something deeply human. Dr. Whitmore had told him earlier that the hospital's success continued to exceed expectations. More children were being treated, more families helped. The ripple he started had grown far beyond anything he could have planned. But as Keanu stood there, he didn't think about the millions raised or the articles written. He thought about Ella's courage, the children's laughter, and the way people had rediscovered what giving really meant. The echo of Marjorie's voice from that first night returned to him. Some people give money, others give heart. He smiled faintly. Maybe, in the end, the world just needed reminders, small acts that spoke louder than wealth or fame ever could. He stepped closer to the paintings. The nurse's hands in Ella's first piece seemed alive again under the soft light, as if reaching out not to heal one child, but to embrace them all. And beside it, the quiet giver glowed with warmth, a faceless act of kindness that had outlasted applause, cameras, and headlines. Keanu exhaled slowly. He didn't see himself as the hero of this story. He never had. To him, it was always about the chain of goodness that began long before he entered that ballroom and would continue long after he left this hallway. He believed kindness was contagious not because it asked for attention, but because it asked for nothing at all. Outside the window, the sunset brushed the city in shades of gold and crimson. The world kept moving, busy and loud as ever. But in that small corner of it, there was stillness, a silence that spoke volumes. And in that silence came the unspoken truth that guided his life. Humility was never about thinking less of yourself. It was about thinking of others first. He took one last look at the paintings and smiled. The art wasn't just a symbol of generosity. It was proof that compassion could live on quietly without needing to shout. He turned to leave, the echo of children's laughter following him down the hall. And as he stepped into the fading light of the corridor, one simple thought remained: that in a world that values noise, silence can still teach. And in a room full of pride, kindness can still shine. Outside, the sun dipped lower, bathing the hospital grounds in soft amber light. Keanu walked slowly toward the exit, the polished floor reflecting his steps like ripples on water. Every few feet, he passed reminders of what this place represented: a thank you note taped to a wall, a crayon drawing of a smiling nurse, a pair of tiny shoes left beside a bench by a family who had just taken their child home. He paused near the main doors, looking through the glass at the courtyard beyond. Nurses were changing shifts. Parents held their children's hands, guiding them toward cars waiting at the curb. A boy in a wheelchair waved to a girl down the hall, both laughing despite the IV tubes at their sides. The world, even with its hardships, still found ways to smile. Keanu stood there quietly for a moment, his hands in his pockets, watching the scene unfold. It reminded him that kindness rarely made noise. It showed itself in small ways: a smile, a hand held, a word of comfort when nothing else could be done. Those were the things that truly mattered. He thought of Amanda's letter, still framed in her home. He thought of Victor Lane, who had turned shame into generosity. He thought of Ella, who had turned her gratitude into art. All of them, in their own ways, had been changed not by grand gestures, but by quiet ones. For years, Keanu had believed that the world didn't need heroes as much as it needed reminders. That night at the auction had proven it true. One small act, a bid, a choice to give without expectation, had created a chain reaction of compassion that had touched people he would never meet. He took a breath and whispered to himself, "It was never about me." A nurse passing by smiled and said softly, "Have a good evening, sir." He returned the smile. "You too," he said, "and thank you for what you do every day." She looked surprised, then nodded, her eyes brightening. It was a simple exchange, but it carried the same quiet grace that had changed that auction hall months ago. As Keanu stepped through the glass doors and into the evening air, the world seemed peaceful. The sound of the city was faint in the distance, but within the hospital walls behind him, something far more powerful lingered, a living reminder that humility could transform hearts faster than wealth ever could. He turned once more to glance at the hospital's front entrance. Through the window, he could see the glow of the two paintings on the wall. They seemed to shimmer together in the fading light, as though they were still speaking to each other, one showing the act of healing, the other showing the heart behind it. For a moment, his reflection overlapped with them again, his silhouette blending into the images of hands and hearts. It was as if the story had come full circle, the giver becoming part of the gift. He smiled faintly and whispered, "The world still has goodness." Then he walked into the dusk, calm and unhurried, his figure disappearing into the soft light of evening. Voiceover reflection. In a world that values noise, silence can still teach. In a room full of pride, kindness can still shine. And sometimes, the greatest power isn't in being seen. It's in quietly choosing to do what's right. Final message to the audience. If this incredible story moved you, remember, real generosity isn't about how much you give, but how you give it. Have you ever witnessed an act of humble kindness that changed your view of the world? Share it in the comments. And if you believe kindness is still alive, subscribe for more incredible stories that restore faith in humanity.